Open that gate right now! He is refusing public access. Send deputies now!
Welcome back to HOA Justice Stories, where power gets questioned, facts come first, and the truth always has the final say.
Patricia Collins jammed her phone on speaker and ordered 911 to force open my private Lake Road gate. Her HOA crowd blocked the gravel shoulder behind her, claiming my private access road belonged to the neighborhood. Boat trailers stacked up toward the county highway. Horns started. A base boat sat crooked in the ditch with its tires spinning in wet clay. The keypad, camera tower, and steel gate were mine, and that road controlled the only legal entrance to Mercer Lake. Then Patricia told dispatch I was creating a public safety emergency. The crowd got louder. She had just dragged the sheriff's system into a property fight she did not understand. Lake fog hung low over the pine trees. Red brake lights glowed through it like coals. Patricia stood at the front of the crowd in white slacks, a navy blazer, and pearls bright enough to catch the patrol lights before the patrol cars even arrived. Her voice carried across the road. "He is refusing public access," she said into the phone. "Send deputies now." I stood on the other side of the gate with my hands resting on the top rail. The steel was cold under my palms. The air smelled like wet gravel, boat fuel, and morning rain. Nobody looked at the posted signs. Private road. No public access. Gate monitored. They had passed those signs for years like decoration. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 44, white, and I own the land wrapped around the north side of Mercer Lake. I also spent 22 years in law enforcement, most of them managing rural access disputes that started exactly like this. Loud voices. Bad assumptions. One person treating a locked gate like a personal insult. I did not say any of that to Patricia. Not yet. She preferred an audience, and she had built herself a good one. Homeowners stood beside polished sport utility vehicles with coffee cups and folded arms. A man in a fishing vest kept shaking his head at me. A teenage kid filmed from the back of a pickup truck. Someone muttered that people like me ruined communities. Patricia heard that and smiled. It was small. Sharp. Practiced. Then she raised her voice again so everyone could hear dispatch through the speaker. "This road has always served our lake access," she said. "He cannot just lock it because he feels like it." The dispatcher asked for the address. Patricia gave it. Then the line went quiet for half a second. Just half a second. I heard it anyway. My radio training caught the pause before my ears did. Patricia did not notice. She was too busy turning toward the crowd like she had already won. Behind her, a gray pickup tried to squeeze around the line and nearly clipped the ditch. Gravel popped under the tires. A boat trailer swayed. People stepped back. The situation was no longer just loud. It was getting unsafe. I looked up at the camera mounted above the gate. Its little red recording light blinked steadily. Every word. Every vehicle. Every attempt to force entry. Patricia pointed at that camera next. "And he is recording residents without consent," she said. That got more murmurs from the crowd. I kept my mouth shut. The first siren rose from the south road a minute later. Then a second. Then a third. Patricia lowered the phone and smoothed her blazer like the scene was finally becoming official. She had no idea how official it was about to become. The sirens grew louder until the sound bounced off the lake and rolled back through the trees. Several residents stepped closer to the gate. Others raised their phones. Patricia stood near the keypad with her chin lifted, watching the south road like she was waiting for confirmation. The crowd expected a simple ending. Deputies arrive. Gate opens. Problem solved. That assumption had become very popular around Mercer Lake. The first patrol vehicle emerged through the fog and turned onto the gravel shoulder. Then a second followed. Then a third. Blue lights flashed across boat trailers and windshields. The lake water reflected the color in broken pieces. Nobody spoke for a moment. Tires crunched slowly over wet stone. Engines idled. The smell of exhaust mixed with pine needles and lake mud. One deputy stepped out and looked toward the gate. Then he looked at me. Just for a second. Patricia did not catch it. I did. Another patrol unit parked farther back near the line of waiting vehicles. A deputy began speaking with several residents. Patricia immediately started walking toward the lead vehicle. She moved fast enough that her heels slipped slightly in the gravel. "Officer," she called. "Thank goodness you are here." The deputy listened politely. She pointed toward me. She pointed toward the gate. She pointed toward the backed-up traffic. Her version of the story came out quickly. Too quickly. The deputy nodded occasionally but said very little. That seemed to frustrate her. Patricia was used to controlling conversations. Silence made her uncomfortable. I remained near the gate and watched. Above me, the camera tower continued recording. A gull circled over the lake and cried out once before disappearing into the fog. Small details stood out when people were focused on the wrong things. One deputy walked toward the posted signs and read them carefully. Another examined the keypad. A third studied the camera system. They were paying attention to details Patricia wanted ignored. That mattered. The crowd began whispering among themselves. A few residents looked less confident than before. The longer nobody opened the gate, the stranger the situation became. Patricia sensed it too. She pulled out her phone and began showing documents to one of the deputies. HOA maps. Community brochures. Promotional materials. Anything that suggested the road belonged to everyone. The deputy glanced at them and handed them back. His expression never changed. That was unusual. Most people react somehow when confronted publicly. He did not. 20 years in law enforcement taught me to recognize disciplined behavior. These deputies were not rushing. They were gathering information. Patricia mistook patience for agreement. That was another mistake. A boat owner near the front of the line suddenly shouted that he had paid for a guided fishing trip. Someone else complained about lost reservations. The pressure on Patricia should have helped her position. Instead, it made the crowd harder to manage. More voices joined in. More questions appeared. The situation was growing larger than a gate dispute. Then one deputy lifted a shoulder radio and quietly gave a name. My name. Several heads turned immediately. Patricia heard it too. The look on her face changed for the first time that morning. Then the dispatcher responded. The dispatcher's response came through the deputy's radio in a burst of static. Several words were lost in the noise. One was not. Mercer. The name carried clearly across the quiet road. Patricia stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. Her eyes shifted from the deputy to me and back again. Around us, the crowd sensed something had changed, even if they did not understand what. The deputy listened for several seconds without interrupting. Then he answered in a calm voice and stepped away from the group. The lake breeze pushed fog across the road in thin gray sheets. Boat trailers sat motionless. A gull landed on a fence post near the water. Nobody seemed interested in fishing anymore. Patricia recovered quickly. She always did. She turned toward the residents and lifted her chin. "This is exactly why we called," she said. "Now they are getting the facts." Several homeowners nodded. Others looked less certain. The delay was becoming difficult to explain. If the situation were as simple as Patricia claimed, the gate should have been open already. Instead, deputies were checking signs, reviewing information, and making radio calls. One resident finally asked the question nobody wanted to ask. "If this road is public, why are they still standing here?" Patricia ignored him. She walked directly toward me instead. Gravel crunched beneath her heels. The smell of wet pine drifted through the air. She stopped a few feet from the gate. "You are enjoying this," she said. I shook my head. No. That answer seemed to irritate her more than an argument would have. For months she had treated the road like a community amenity. The brochures did it. The board meetings did it. The residents did it. Every summer, more vehicles crossed the property. More visitors arrived at the lake. More assumptions became facts simply because people repeated them often enough. Then I installed the gate. That was when the complaints started. At first they arrived as emails. Then letters. Then HOA meetings. Patricia turned each disagreement into a public performance. She spoke about access, community rights, neighborhood traditions. She never spoke about ownership. That detail rarely helped her case. A deputy approached the gate and asked if he could inspect the camera system. I nodded and opened a small access panel beside the keypad. Patricia immediately stepped forward. "You are helping him?" she asked. The deputy looked at her politely. "I am gathering information, ma'am." The answer sounded routine. The reaction was not. Several residents exchanged glances. The confidence that had filled the crowd earlier was fading. Questions were replacing certainty. The deputy spent several minutes reviewing the system. Camera feeds, entry logs, timestamps. Every vehicle that had approached the gate was recorded. Every attempt to enter was documented. The little red recording light continued blinking above us. Patricia noticed it again. This time she said nothing. Another patrol vehicle arrived from the county road. That caught my attention. They already had enough units for a simple access complaint. Additional vehicles suggested something else was happening. The lead deputy checked his watch and looked south. Then he straightened slightly when he saw who had just arrived. So did I. Then Patricia followed his gaze. Patricia followed the deputy's gaze toward the county road. The crowd did the same. Conversation faded almost immediately. A black command SUV rolled through the fog and stopped behind the patrol units. Its headlights cut long beams across the gravel. Nobody moved for a second. Then the driver's door opened. A tall lieutenant stepped out carrying a folder under one arm. The lead deputy straightened slightly. So did two others standing near the gate. Patricia noticed that. Her expression tightened. She had expected enforcement. She had not expected structure. The lieutenant walked past the waiting vehicles without speaking to anyone. Boat owners watched him pass. Homeowners lowered their phones. Even the complaints stopped. The only sounds came from idling engines and the soft water against the shoreline. The lieutenant stopped beside the lead deputy. They exchanged a few quiet words. Then both men looked toward me. Patricia stepped forward. Before either could move. "Good," she said. "Maybe somebody can finally explain why this gate is still closed." The lieutenant listened politely. He did not answer immediately. That seemed to surprise her. Most people reacted to Patricia's confidence. This man simply listened. She launched into the same argument again. Community access. Resident expectations. Safety concerns. Long-standing use. The speech sounded rehearsed. She had probably delivered versions of it for months. Maybe years. The lieutenant waited until she finished. Then he asked a simple question. "Do you have documentation showing ownership or legal access authority?" The crowd became very quiet. Patricia blinked once. Then she held up a stack of HOA materials. Maps. Community guides. Promotional brochures. The lieutenant glanced at them briefly. His expression never changed. He handed them back. A few residents shifted uncomfortably. The difference between marketing and documentation was becoming harder to ignore. Wind moved across the lake and rattled nearby tree branches. The smell of wet pine filled the air. I remained beside the gate while the conversation continued. Several deputies had started reviewing the posted signs again. One took photographs. Another checked the entry logs from the keypad system. Nobody appeared interested in forcing anything open. Patricia noticed that too. Her frustration became visible. She folded her arms. Unfolded them. Then folded them again. "This road has served the neighborhood for years," she said. "Everyone uses it." The lieutenant nodded. "Use and ownership are not always the same thing." A few people in the crowd exchanged glances. That sentence landed harder than Patricia expected. The assumptions that supported her position were starting to crack. Then a homeowner near the front raised his hand. "Wait," he asked. "If this is private property, why did dispatch send so many units?" Several people immediately looked toward the deputies. It was a fair question. The response did not come from the lieutenant. It came from a radio clipped to a deputy's shoulder. Static crackled. Then a dispatcher requested confirmation of command contact on scene. The wording caught my attention. So did the reaction. The lead deputy answered immediately. The lieutenant answered next. Both sounded professional. Both sounded prepared. Patricia looked from one deputy to another. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared behind her confidence. Then the lieutenant opened the folder he had been carrying. The lieutenant opened the folder and removed several printed pages protected inside clear sleeves. Morning sunlight finally began breaking through the fog. Thin beams reflected off windshields and chrome boat trailers. The crowd leaned forward almost as one. People wanted answers. Patricia wanted validation. The lieutenant placed the documents on the hood of a patrol vehicle and reviewed them carefully before speaking. Nobody interrupted him. Even the complaints had faded. The lake road felt strangely quiet despite dozens of people standing there. "We are verifying information received through dispatch and county records," he said. The statement sounded simple. Yet it immediately changed the mood. Verification was not enforcement. Patricia noticed the distinction. Her jaw tightened. She stepped closer and pointed toward the gate. "You already have all the information you need," she said. "The residents need access." The lieutenant looked at her politely. "That is not how this process works." Several residents exchanged uneasy glances. The confidence that filled the crowd an hour earlier was slowly draining away. A man near the front lowered his phone. Another homeowner folded up a lawn chair she had brought to watch the confrontation. People were beginning to realize this was not turning into the public victory Patricia had promised. The smell of coffee drifted from a nearby truck. A fishing guide sat on his trailer fender staring toward the deputies. Nobody seemed interested in arguing anymore. They wanted to understand why law enforcement kept treating the situation like a documented property matter instead of a simple access complaint. Patricia tried again. She opened a folder from her vehicle and produced copies of community maps. Several pages fluttered in the breeze. Colorful diagrams. Neighborhood layouts. Marketing material. The lieutenant reviewed them briefly. Then he handed them back. "These are not ownership records," he said. The words landed harder than anything else spoken that morning. A resident behind Patricia quietly asked another homeowner if the road was actually private. Neither knew the answer. For years nobody had bothered asking.
If you're enjoying the story so far, consider subscribing. It helps us keep bringing you real stories where facts matter more than power.
The assumptions had been easier. I watched from beside the gate while deputies continued checking details. Entry logs. Survey markers. Property signs. Camera records. Their attention to procedure told me something important. Dispatch had not sent them here simply to clear traffic. Someone higher up wanted the situation documented correctly. That realization spread through the scene little by little. Patricia sensed it before most others. She stopped talking for nearly a full minute. That alone was unusual. Then the lead deputy approached the lieutenant and handed him a printed sheet. The lieutenant read it once. Then again. His expression remained controlled, but he immediately closed the folder and looked toward me. Several deputies followed his gaze. Patricia noticed every second of it. So did the crowd. A homeowner near the back finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "Who exactly are they waiting on?" Nobody answered him. Not directly. The lieutenant checked his watch. The lead deputy adjusted his radio. Then a new voice came through the speaker clipped to his shoulder. The transmission was short. Professional. Precise. The effect was immediate. Every deputy on scene became noticeably more attentive. Patricia looked from one uniform to another. For the first time that morning, She seemed unsure whether she was still directing the situation. Then another vehicle turned onto the road. Another vehicle rolled onto the gravel road and immediately drew everyone's attention. It was not a patrol unit. It carried no emergency lights. The dark county sedan moved slowly through the line of waiting trucks and boat trailers before stopping near the command SUV. The driver's door opened. A man in a gray county jacket stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Several deputies recognized him immediately. Patricia noticed that. Her eyes narrowed. The county official walked straight toward the lieutenant without looking at the crowd. They spoke quietly for less than a minute. Then the portfolio changed hands. The lieutenant opened it and began reviewing documents page by page. The atmosphere shifted again. Nobody was talking about lake access anymore. They were talking about paperwork, ownership, records, authority. The things Patricia had spent months dismissing suddenly became the center of attention. A fishing guide near the front of the line climbed down from his trailer and crossed his arms. A homeowner asked whether the HOA had legal access documents. Nobody answered. The silence answered for them. Wind pushed across the lake and rattled the reeds along the shoreline. Sunlight finally burned through most of the fog. The gate cast a long shadow across the gravel. The camera above it continued blinking steadily, recording everything. Patricia stepped toward the lieutenant again. "This has gone far enough," she said. "Residents need access to the lake." Her voice was firm, but it lacked the certainty it had earlier that morning. The lieutenant listened. Then he looked down at the papers in his hands. "We are determining the status of the access corridor," he said. "That requires verification." Several residents exchanged confused looks. One homeowner asked why verification was necessary if the road belonged to the community. Another asked why county officials were involved at all. More questions followed. Patricia suddenly found herself facing the same crowd that had supported her only an hour before. The difference was subtle but important. They were no longer looking at me. They were looking at her. I remained beside the gate. The steel felt warm now under the growing sun. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. A brief message. Nothing more. I slipped the phone away without responding. A deputy noticed. He said nothing. Then the county official approached the gate and studied the signs mounted beside the keypad. Private road. Authorized access only. Recorded entry point. He compared them to something inside his portfolio. Then he nodded once. The lieutenant immediately asked another deputy for a copy of the incident notes. Patricia saw that exchange. Her shoulders stiffened. She was beginning to understand that the situation had moved beyond her control. The crowd understood it too. People who had arrived expecting a public victory were now standing quietly in the sun, watching county personnel review records. Even the complaints about missed fishing trips had faded. Facts were replacing assumptions. That process tends to make people uncomfortable. A radio crackled again. The dispatcher requested an updated status report. The lead deputy answered. This time everyone heard the response. Several homeowners looked directly at me afterward. Patricia did too. Her expression changed completely. Then the lieutenant finally closed the portfolio. The lieutenant closed the portfolio and held it against his chest for a moment. Nobody spoke. The lake breeze carried the sound of water against the docks somewhere beyond the trees. A boat engine started in the distance, and then faded again. Every person standing near the gate seemed to be waiting for the same thing. An answer. Patricia took a step forward. "Well?" she asked. The confidence was still there, but it sounded thinner now. The lieutenant looked toward the road, then toward the gate, then finally toward me. "We have confirmed several key facts," he said. That sentence immediately pulled the attention of every resident. Phones came up again. Conversation stopped. The crowd leaned closer. Patricia folded her arms. The lieutenant continued carefully. He explained that county records, dispatch information, and property documentation had all been reviewed. He chose each word with obvious care. Nobody interrupted him. A deputy stood nearby holding a folder of incident notes. Another remained beside the keypad system. The atmosphere no longer felt like a neighborhood dispute. It felt official. The kind of official Patricia had been demanding all morning. The problem was that official processes do not always produce the answer people expect. A homeowner near the front asked whether the road was community property. The lieutenant did not answer directly. Instead, he asked another deputy for a copy of the survey reference attached to the report. Several pages changed hands. Patricia watched every movement. Her eyes never left the documents. The crowd noticed that too. People tend to follow confidence until confidence starts looking uncertain. Then they begin looking elsewhere. More residents were watching the deputies now than they were watching Patricia. That shift mattered. The sun climbed higher over the lake. The fog had almost disappeared. Bright light reflected off the steel gate, and the camera housing mounted above it. The little red indicator continued blinking steadily. Recording every minute. Recording every statement. Recording every demand. One deputy approached me and quietly asked whether the system stored entry logs. I nodded. "Every vehicle," I said. He thanked me and returned to the group. Patricia immediately looked in our direction. She wanted to know what had been said. Nobody volunteered the answer. Another radio transmission crackled across the scene. The dispatcher requested confirmation that the reporting party remained on location. The lead deputy acknowledged the request. Then he added a detail that caused several residents to exchange surprised looks. Patricia heard it too. Her expression tightened. A homeowner standing near the fishing trailers finally asked the question that had been building for the last hour. "Why do they keep referencing Daniel?" Nobody answered immediately. The silence felt heavier than any response. The lieutenant glanced toward me once more. Then he turned back to the crowd. "Some of the information connected to this location required command-level verification," he said. Several residents frowned. Patricia looked genuinely confused. The phrase had clearly caught her off guard. She opened her mouth as if to challenge it, then stopped. The realization was beginning to form. Not the whole picture. Just enough to make her uncomfortable. Around us, deputies suddenly became more formal. Radios were checked. Notes were reviewed. Positions shifted slightly. Small details. Professional details. The kind most people overlook. I recognized them immediately. So did the lieutenant. Then he looked directly at me and said, "Sir, I believe it is time we clarify a few things." The lieutenant's words settled over the crowd like a sudden change in weather. Nobody moved. Even the people who had been whispering all morning fell silent. The lake shimmered behind the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a boat horn echoed once and faded. I stepped away from the gate and walked toward the patrol vehicles. Gravel crunched beneath my boots. Every set of eyes followed me. Patricia watched closely. Her expression had shifted from confidence to confusion. She knew something important was happening. She still did not know what. The lieutenant met me halfway. We exchanged a brief nod. Professional. Familiar. Nothing dramatic. Yet that small gesture caused several residents to glance at one another. They had noticed it too. The lieutenant turned toward the crowd. "For clarity," he said, "this location was flagged through command verification because of Mr. Mercer's current position and authority within regional law enforcement operations." The words landed hard. A homeowner near the front blinked twice. Another lowered his phone. Patricia stared at the lieutenant as if she had misheard him. "What does that mean?" she asked. The lieutenant answered calmly. "It means dispatch was required to verify certain information through supervisory channels before responding." Patricia looked directly at me. For the first time all morning, she seemed to be searching for answers instead of giving them. The crowd remained silent. The lead deputy stepped forward and opened a folder. Inside were property records, incident notes, dispatch logs, and survey references. He reviewed them one by one. Every document pointed in the same direction. The road remained private. The gate remained private. The access system remained private. Nothing they had reviewed suggested otherwise. A resident finally raised his hand. So nobody can force it open? The deputy shook his head. Not under these circumstances. More silence followed. The realization spread through the group in waves. The brochures. The assumptions. The years of unrestricted use. None of those things had changed ownership. Patricia opened her mouth to object, then stopped. The argument she had been making all morning was running out of ground beneath it. Wind moved through the pines above the shoreline. The smell of warm gravel and lake water filled the air. A few homeowners quietly returned to their vehicles. Others stayed, watching. They wanted to hear the rest. The lieutenant looked toward me again. Would you like to explain the access restrictions? He asked. I nodded. My voice carried easily across the road. I explained that the gate had been installed after repeated unauthorized traffic, property damage, and liability concerns. I explained that access requests had procedures. I explained that ownership had never changed. Nobody interrupted. Even Patricia remained quiet. That surprised me more than anything else. The lead deputy then addressed the crowd. He confirmed that law enforcement was not there to compel access. They were there because a call had been placed and facts needed verification. Those facts had now been verified. Several residents turned toward Patricia. The shift was immediate. Questions that had been aimed at me all morning were now directed toward her. When had the HOA confirmed ownership? Had they ever reviewed the records? Why had residents been told the road belonged to the community? Patricia had no quick answers. Then someone asked about the board meeting minutes. The question about the board meeting minutes changed everything. It was simple. Direct. Impossible to ignore. Several residents immediately started talking among themselves. Names. Dates. Past meetings. Promises that had been made. Patricia looked from face to face as the crowd slowly stopped looking at me and started looking at her. That shift was more powerful than any argument. The lake road was no longer the center of attention. Accountability was. The lieutenant stepped back and allowed the conversation to unfold naturally. His job was finished. The facts had been verified. The deputies remained professional. Calm. Patient. The same way they had been all morning. A homeowner near the front asked whether the HOA had ever obtained a legal easement. Another asked whether ownership records had been reviewed before residents were told the road belonged to the community. Patricia tried to answer. She spoke about tradition, long-standing use, community expectations. The words sounded weaker now. Every answer led back to the same problem. None of those things established ownership. Sunlight reflected off the lake behind the trees. The fog was completely gone. The road looked exactly the same as it had at sunrise. The difference was that everyone finally understood what it was. Private property. A private gate. A private access system. Facts do not become less true because many people repeat something else. The fishing guide who had been waiting all morning shook his head and climbed into his truck. A few residents followed. Others stayed behind to ask questions. Not to me. To Patricia. The board president who had promised them a public victory now found herself explaining why law enforcement had confirmed the opposite. The lieutenant closed the final folder and handed it back to the county official. Several deputies returned to their vehicles. Engines started. Radios crackled. The scene was winding down. Before leaving, the lieutenant walked over and shook my hand. It was brief. Professional. Nothing more. Yet half the crowd noticed it. Patricia certainly did. By then, the realization had fully arrived. The call she placed expecting authority to support her position had brought authority that verified the facts instead. Nobody forced the gate open. Nobody ordered access. Nobody challenged the ownership records. The process worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. One fact at a time. Over the following weeks, the HOA held several meetings. Residents requested records. Questions continued. New discussions appeared on community message boards. Some homeowners were frustrated. Others simply wanted transparency. As for the road, it remained exactly where it had always been. The keypad stayed in place. The cameras stayed active. Access requests followed the established process. Life became quieter. Months later, I stood beside the lake at sunset. Orange light stretched across the water. A pair of ducks drifted near the shoreline. The gate stood closed behind me. Not because I wanted conflict. Because boundaries exist for a reason. Across the lake, I could see the neighborhood in the distance. Calm. Orderly. Moving on. In the end, nobody lost access because of a phone call. They lost an assumption. And that made all the difference.
Until next time. Remember, the truth may take time, but it always leaves a record.